Good evening and welcome once again to the Football Savages NFL Draft Podcast, the Draft Savages Podcast. I'm your host, Seth Cox. With me tonight, one of my co-hosts, Justin Higdon. Justin, how are you?
Good, man. We're talking about the Big 12, which of course has a Big 10 teams, which really means it really only has about like 6 teams we're talking about. But there's some good prospects to talk about tonight. Not a ton, but there are some good ones and some well-known ones. So it'll be good show.
And I'm going to go first because Baylor, I get to pick the easy one. So, but yeah, we're talking Big 12 tonight. Finish off the Big 5 with the ACC next week, and maybe even talk a little Notre Dame since they're stacked with talent this year, and they should be in a conference bunch of pansies. And so we'll finish up with the ACC. Justice should be back next week. Apparently making a living is more important than a free podcast. I don't know what to tell you guys, but that's what Justice thinks. Yeah, that's what Justice thinks of you, the listeners. No, I'm just kidding. So tonight, talking Big 12 and just, kind of the conference overall, still a little down. I think we're all kind of waiting for the Charlie Strong era to kind of take hold before we really judge what the Big 12 is anymore. So I think it starts with, does Texas take the next step this year? Where does, what is West Virginia? Are they a contender or a pretender? And then, can TCU and Oklahoma carry the torch kind of like Ohio State and Michigan State did last year and be good enough to get into the playoff? Never forget, Twitter hated that Ohio State got in over Texas Christian. Ohio State had no business getting beaten by Alabama by 45 points. I mean, it was a given. Texas Christian was robbed. So always remember, Twitter knows everything. They never miss. So we're going to start with Baylor.
Fair, not just Twitter, but Art Briles, Baylor's head coach, was a big one of the biggest complainers of the whole college football playoff process. Griping about that. Well, Big 12, if you really want to make sure you get in next time, you better figure out a way to get a championship game, because that's really what got Ohio State in. Of course, we know what happened from there.
Yeah, well, they didn't deserve it, so it doesn't count as a national title, and Justice will back me up on that. So we're going to start with Baylor, and like I said, I'll go with the obvious one first, and I'm just going to steal this because I know how big of a fan you are. Obviously, Sean Oakman, 6'9", 5 million pounds, runs a 4.5 40, basically built like an NFL superstar. The question becomes consistency with him, because his highs are top 5 high, wouldn't you say? And then his lows are, a guy that can't figure out how to use his body at times still. When you're that big, football's harder. Like, everybody can say it's easier, but you have a lot more levers to go through and a lot more you have to worry about. But I want to see Oakman this year kind of play like Calais Campbell. I want to see him be able to dominate in the run game and learn to use his length as an advantage, as opposed to letting guys get under him and move him. So that means playing with a lower pad level at times, using those arms, those tree trunks of arms to kind of reach out and control offensive linemen. And I think as he does that, we're going to see whether or not, he can be a top 5 guy. I think from there, it's just going to be all about, consistency with him. So that's my obvious one to know, Oakman. You can talk about him a little bit, because I know you want to talk about him too.
Yeah, I mean, I'm going to, riff off of what you started here. Oakman is a player who's really polarizing right now, and he's generated a lot of articles early on saying, already saying he's the most overrated prospect, things like that. If for longtime listeners of the show, that Justice and I are have talked about Oakman, and we've talked about planet theory, and that's big strong guys who can run and stop the run. And Oakman is a player who fits that mold. He doesn't, I don't know that he puts it all together, and I think that's why people get frustrated. But I talked about this last week a little bit, and when you label a guy as an edge, I think that connotes that you want that guy to be a pass rusher, a bendy type of traditional pass rush threat, and that isn't what a 6'8", 300-pound guy is going to be best at. So if you think about what I think about Oakman is what people kind of wanted out of Eric Armstead last year, and Eric Armstead still goes in the top 20. I think Oakman's a better player. I think he's been a far more productive player. He doesn't get a sack on every play, but he's getting double-digit sacks last year. He went from 2 sacks to like 11 sacks last year, had 19 tackles for loss. There were times when he was out of the game, but it was almost every game that I watched where he did make some impact plays. There wasn't games where he was just getting shut out. And I think he's got that impact ability. I think there is something to say about consistency. I think the other thing that's a little bit bothersome to me about Oakman is that he was a 23-year-old last year, so he's gonna be a 23-year-old this year. He's already turned 23, so he turns 24 prior to the draft next year. He's going to be a 24-year-old rookie. That's going to push him back a little bit. I think we talked about this with Shalik Calhoun a couple weeks ago. So Oakman is on the older side, but he's certainly a physical specimen. I think he's a player you can get 8 good years out of. And you want to see him take the next step this year and really be a more consistent impact player. But I think that people saying that he's not an impact player are kind of downplaying what he actually did. He did some really good things last year, and I think we know he's a freak athlete. I think he's capable of more, and I think he'll show more this year.
So that's our one to know. We're going to go consensus on that. One to watch for you this year.
I'm going to go with their quarterback, and that's Seth Russell. He's a first-year starter. He comes in for Bryce Petty. He's I believe Russell's a redshirt junior. I know he's at least a junior in terms of eligibility. So we haven't seen a lot of him. There's some YouTube tape of him out there. It's not much. He did play a bit last year when Petty went down with that back injury. Russell is supposed to be kind of like Petty in that he's an athletic freak, and I think Bruce Feldman right now he's doing the freak list for Fox Sports, and I expect Russell is going to get a mention on there somewhere. So it'll be interesting. I think people always are expecting big numbers out of Baylor quarterbacks. Russell's the guy who's over 6'3", 220 pounds. He's built like an NFL quarterback. He's going to run that spread air raid system that's going to create questions when he does come out. So I'm interested to see if he is a one and done starter for them. I kind of anticipate that he'll be a 2-year starter for them, and we'll be talking about him again next summer.
So my one to watch this year is going to be Spencer Drango. I'm pretty sure Sully, I'm not sure what Sully's real name is, but Sully on Twitter has basically like hitched his wagon to him, right? Like he loves him, doesn't he? If I remember right. I could be thinking of somebody else, but I'm pretty sure it's Spencer Drango. He's going to be the left tackle, 6'5", prototype size, 6'5", 315. Basically, we're going to know whether or not he can pass block when he comes out. And I think that's, watching him and seeing him again in the air raid offense, like you said, he doesn't get a ton of work in deep sets and things of that nature. But I think you can tell whether or not he can pass block at the next level, and that's going to be important. My question with him is, again, 5th-year senior. Why are these guys all so old for Baylor? Like, I know it's a great school, but like, what is there to do there? I don't know. So, he's going to be a 5th-year senior, 3-year starter, talented guy. We'll see what happens with him. He's had back injuries too. That's the other thing that I'm kind of interested in. So, we'll see what happens with Drango.
There's already been talk of Drango having to move to guard too as a pro prospect. So I'm interested to see if that is how does he play at tackle this year? Is he going to play well enough to stay at tackle, or is he going to have the desired arm length? He's 6'6". He should have long enough arms to stay at tackle. My thought on him was when I first looked at him, I took some notes on him last year. I was thinking right tackle. That's kind of the default if you don't think a guy's quite the specimen to play, or quite the athletic specimen to play left tackle. So, but I think teams are going to draft him as a tackle. I think there will be some team that likes him that way. Now I want to talk about just briefly the sleeper, and I want to say that in air quotes, but the sleeper I put down here was Laquan McGowan, and the reason I put him down is he is listed at tight end. He was originally a backup offensive lineman. He's listed on Baylor's roster as at 410 pounds, and he is still listed as a tight end. He's wearing a number in the 80s this year. He did have a touchdown catch last year. He's listed on ourlads.com. They do great depth charts. Check that out. But he's listed as the backup tight end there. It sounds like he's going to play tight end and work out there. He's working out there. He's going to catch some passes. He's probably really going to function as a sixth offensive lineman. But I'm fascinated with these players that are listed at 400 pounds. I mentioned one a couple of weeks ago at the Big 10. So that's an interesting one. And they're putting him in, like I said, in a jersey with a number 80 on it. So that tells me that they are trying to work him into the offense.
And then I'll just quickly go through my sleeper. By the way, that's a great sleeper because I'm interested to see if how much he even gets on the field. My sleeper, and he's probably not a sleeper for guys that do their homework. So sorry, taking an easy sleeper here, but sorry, Andrew Billings. He's going to be a junior this year, I believe. I think he's actually like a true junior.
Yeah, only 19 years old, I think.
Yeah, so he's started a lot for them. He started, I think, 15 or 16 games overall, played in like 26 or 27. He's going to be one of those interesting like Will Sutton type guys because he's listed at 6'2", so he's probably what, 6 feet and a half, or maybe 6'1", 300 pounds, explosive player. I want to see what he does. He's been playing nose tackle for them, so I'm always interested when a guy's 6'2" and only quotes 300 pounds playing nose tackle and what is going to be expected of him. So we'll see what happens there. So with that, do you have anything else on Baylor?
No, just with Billings. I mean, if people that are interested in him, go out there and find. There's a clip of him running down a running back after I think it was a short screen pass or a draw play, something like that. He chases the running back downfield 40 yards. That's like the hot clip on Andrew Billings right now. So, and it shows off his athleticism. I'm interested in him too, and he might be one of those guys who actually leaves Baylor while he's still young.
Yeah, he won't be 25 when he's drafted. Iowa State, let's not waste too much time here.
I mean, they've got a 6'6" receiver in DeVario Montgomery, and I believe he's a junior, a redshirt junior. So that's the one guy that I put down. I think he had he put up solid statistics on a team that does not really have a great offense or great quarterback, but he did have over 40 catches, I believe. And, anytime you see a receiver listed that's that big, 6'6", 220, 230 pounds, that's going to raise an eyebrow. So I'll be keeping my eye on him. Beyond that, Iowa State is a team which, quite frankly, is just never very interesting to me. And until they kind of get things turned around there, it's just really a team that I overlook. And I quite honestly, I don't really watch other teams play against them because I don't consider them to be very good competition. So there's probably people out there who think that, I'm missing somebody by taking that approach, but there's only so many hours in a day. And I'm honest with everybody. I have a different job. This isn't my full-time job, and I'm just not going to spend a lot of time on Iowa State.
Yeah, and I'm the same way. Sorry, draft Knicks. Hate away. But the one guy you mentioned, Montgomery, I'm going to go with another wide receiver, a guy that a lot of people kind of wanted to see last year break out, and then he got hurt. Quentin Bundridge. He's coming back from a knee injury, ACL injury, and we'll see what happens with him this year. Going to be healthy. That's kind of, the one guy you can look at and see what happens. From there, we go to, oh, goodness, I already lost my marker. There we go. Sorry. Kansas. You can go quickly on this one, too.
Yeah, I've got one guy down from Kansas. They really just don't have any they had some draftable prospects last year. They had some interesting undrafted free agents last year. This year, I couldn't really find any. So if they're going to have one this year, it's going to be a guy that emerges. The one player that I wrote down tonight was offensive tackle, Larry Mazik. I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing that name correctly, but the reason I will keep an eye on him is because he started 9 games for them last year. He's 6'8", 343 pounds. That kind of size does raise an eyebrow. So you want to, keep an eye on players that are that big. He's probably a right tackle or guard prospect, but anybody that big is going to, demand some bit of attention. And looks like lost Seth here for a second. So going back real quick to Iowa State.
I'm here. I'm here. I had to take a phone call.
Oh, okay. Well,
sorry.
Just to go back to Iowa State, because Kansas is just so uninteresting that I'm going to go back to Iowa State. Sorry, Ames. I know he's a Kansas guy, but Iowa State, just wanted to say they have two players on their team named Sam Richardson. So one's a corner, one's a quarterback. Those are 2 other guys that I had on my list, both expected to start. But Kansas was really difficult for me to find anybody worth mentioning.
That's really fair. So from there, I have nobody, honestly. Like, I kind of went through everything, and I'm like, all right, can I find like one player maybe at all? And I couldn't. So, and I'm not gonna like try and list off guys that I have no knowledge of. Like, the only reason I brought up the kid from Iowa State was because I knew about him last year. So like, it was one of those things that it just happened to work out for me. So from there we go to K-State, and I don't know what they do at Kansas State, but they produce talent somehow, some way every year. It's kind of baffling because like, they're not great in any way, but they find a way to produce talent. What are your thoughts on K-State?
Yeah, I see Kansas State. Now we're getting into some teams that I can actually talk about, because I've got 3 names down for Kansas State, and I'm going to start. I'll start with a player who I talked about some with our buddy, friend of the show, Jeff Risden last year, and Jeff was really high on this guy, and that's cornerback Danzel McDaniel. He was a junior college transfer, and so he was a first-year player for them last year as a junior. And I think Jeff and I talked about him like last October, and Jeff was pretty sure that he would declare after 1 year. It turns out he came back, and he will play as a senior. McDaniel's a 6'1" cornerback, and he's 6'1", 200. He's solid size. The game that I watched with Jeff, he actually intercepted a pass and returned it for a short touchdown. So he didn't, on paper, he didn't get a lot of plays on the ball, but he shows that kind of ability, and he's got that size, that kind of physicality that I think he will be a player that pro scouts like. And they're just kind of going to be chomping at the bit to see if he can live up to the promise that he shows, the flashes that he shows, because he's got that great size that teams are going to love.
And my guy to know is strictly because I watched BJ Finney a ton last year, because I really liked him as a center prospect. And so I was always like, man, who's that left tackle? And that's Cody Whitehair. He's going to be a redshirt senior this year, so he's probably 30 already. I'm not sure how old he is. But you know who he reminds me of? And I fall in love with these guys every year. He reminds me of Joel Bitonio a little bit, the way he plays the game and everything, and that's kind of why I like him and like what he could be for Kansas State this year. He's probably going to move to guard because they list him at 6'4", so he's probably 6'3", and he's probably got T-Rex arms. But we'll see what happens.
Yeah, he's that kind of athletic mover at left tackle, and doesn't have the ideal size. I know that Dane Brugler of CBS Sports has mentioned white hair, and that he's a fan of white hair. And I believe Dane is another person who thinks he's going to move to guard as a pro. But I like they brought up Bitonio because he is that kind of he's that tough mauler type who gets out to the second level. He'll get one block at the first level, get out to the second level, and knock down a linebacker, and he can spring long runs. And those are players that I gravitate to as well because you like that nastiness that he shows. He is going to be a 24-year-old rookie, like you said, but with offensive linemen, we know that we can have a little bit more leeway with an offensive lineman than we can with, say, a quarterback as far as age is concerned.
You got anybody else for Kansas State? I know there's a couple players, so go ahead.
Yeah, after Whitehair, I had Whitehair down as well because, as I mentioned, I'm a fan of his. But Dante Barnett, the safety, Kansas State has two really intriguing prospects in that defensive backfield, and they're physical guys. McDaniel was a player who I wanted to watch, but Barnett was the guy who kind of stuck out as a tackler, player coming up from the defensive backfield, making plays against the run and against those short, quick hitter passes that a lot of teams use these days. That's a player we've seen in recent years, Dion Buchanan and other safeties, Landon Collins, guys like that who play those quick hitter passes as well. And Dante Barnett, he's not going to go as high as those players, but he's that kind of physical safety who can cover the short area. I'll have to keep an eye on him this year to see how he does deep, but he did statistically, he did pretty well getting his hands on passes, and I think he had 3 interceptions last year. So Barnett's a player I like.
Tyler Lockett doesn't play for them anymore, so after Whitehair and Finney and Lockett, I didn't really care. Honestly, I didn't really watch much of the K-State defense last year. That's why I have Justin on here, and then Justice we have on here to talk about 3 guys so far. So he hasn't been on here, and he says he's busy, but let's just be honest. The Big 12, and they didn't have any force players, so he didn't care.
Justice is also young, so he's still having fun.
That's true too.
Old guys like us, this is.
I know. I'm gonna be 30 this year, man. I'll be 30.
Yeah, we won't talk about my age.
Next. Do you have anybody else for Kansas State?
No, that was it.
All right. Next is, and I'm gonna start with Oklahoma because there's one guy on defense I want to talk about. There's 2 guys on defense, but there's one I want to talk about. And Oklahoma's interesting because everybody talks about the running back that's going to be a true sophomore, right? Samaje Perine. Yeah. I was going to call him Perryman. I can't even remember names. I'm awful right now. So when you look at it, I think you look at Oklahoma, and this is a guy we've talked about. I want to say we talked about him a lot last year too, and that's Eric Stryker. And I'm interested to see what he can play in the NFL. So that doesn't really help us for like this year because we've seen that he's a kind of Telvin Smith type player. Like he's just plays with his hair on fire, and I love that in a defensive player. But he's 6 feet tall and 220 pounds. So like, where is he going to play in the NFL? Like, are they going to have to move him to inside backer? Can he only play in a 4-3 as like an off-ball linebacker? Is a team going to be dumb enough to try to move him to safety? Because he's actually not bad off the edge. Like, I think he's pretty like fun to watch off the edge. But yeah, he's just he's so tiny. Like, I don't know. Like when you see 6 feet and 220, like you think Dion Buchanan, you don't think, oh, this is the linebacker that I need to plug into my defense that's going to make a difference. But I really think he's got something, and it's just one of those like intangible things that you can't really, you know, you can't really explain. But there's just something about him as a player that I like.
Yeah, Striker's a good football player, and in the past years, we've seen guys come into their senior or junior years um, in the 220 or low 230 range, and they've been able to add enough weight by the time the combine or the pro day rolls around to kind of put pro teams at ease. Ryan Shazier is a player who comes to mind, but the guy who I was thinking of was Striker because he is used so much off the edge for them. 15 and a half sacks last 2 years. I thought of Kevin Pierre-Louis from Boston College a couple of years ago, and he was drafted, I believe, in the second or third round by Seattle. He was a combine freak. He was a player listed around 6'6", 6'1", 225 to 230 pounds as a senior. He ends up measuring closer to 230 by the time he gets to the combine pro day. Tested through the roof. They made him a pretty high pick. He hasn't really played much yet, but they did. There was a team out there I thought highly enough, and Striker I think is going to be that type of guy. You can't use a player like that as a pass rusher consistently at the NFL level, but when he has that skill, it does at least buy you some time because you can use him situationally while you kind of teach him the finer points at other positions.
Who's your guy to watch or know for the Oklahoma Sooners?
After Striker, I had Zach Sanchez. He's a redshirt junior cornerback. He's a smaller guy. But Sanchez, if you watched Oklahoma, especially early in the year last year, it seemed like he got an interception a week. He ended up with 6 picks on the year. I think he had 3 the year before that. So he was draft eligible last year, but as I mentioned, he's a smaller guy, so he's not the type of specimen that would declare after a redshirt sophomore year. But after as a fourth-year junior, I do anticipate that he'll make himself draft eligible. And then the question is going to be, is he big enough to play outside? Is he a slot-only guy? And there's a market for that. There's definitely a market. I don't know if he's physical enough to play outside like Jason Verrett. Is he more like a Kwan Williams with Cleveland, who's strictly a slot guy? Sanchez is a player who's fun to watch, and it'll be interesting to see if he can build off last year, at least maintain status quo, because I think he's a candidate to leave school early. Seth's on mute there.
Damn it, I went backwards. I was shaking my head, agreeing with you and not saying anything because I thought I was on mute, and then I hit mute. I got all confused tonight. My sleeper is Sterling Shepard. May not be a sleeper, again, for a lot of draft guys, but a smaller receiver, 5'10", under 200 pounds. He hasn't really broken out at Oklahoma. It's partially because their quarterback sucks, Trevor Knight. He's not very good. Are you going to talk about him? No?
I don't. I don't.
Katy Perry can talk about him, and everybody else can.
It sounds like he's going to lose the job, so I didn't want to include their backup quarterback who's not even a senior.
Yeah, and so, when you look at Shepard, he's, got all the short guy intangibles that you're going to hear about: shifty, good route runner, wins underneath. Yeah, quicker than fast. All that bull crap. What it comes down to is I want to see this guy find a way to break out. Last year wasn't bad. He had almost 1,000 yards on only 50 catches, which is, that's impressive. Like, that's a good season. But I want to see more this year. Maybe I'm greedy. But if I'm going to push a guy into, a draftable position, I want to see more. And I think that's where it kind of starts is, why he'd be my sleeper. Because if they get a quarterback worth a damn, maybe they'll be able to do something.
Yeah, and he's coming off an injury too, correct?
Yes.
Yeah, and I'm staying on the defense for my sleeper, and the reason he's a sleeper is because he's coming off he didn't play at all last year. He's coming off a suspension that was due to an investigation into sexual assault, and they did not. He's not been prosecuted. This is Frank Shannon. He's a middle linebacker for them, and he was a very good player 2 years ago. Now, there are going to be hundreds of questions about his off the field because, as we know, just because a player has been, cleared by the school or even cleared by from a legal standpoint, doesn't necessarily mean that there's not fire where that smoke was. But Shannon is getting back on the field. He sounds like determined to make up for lost time. He was a player who I believe NFL scouts were pretty high on heading into last summer before his season was completely derailed. So I think Shannon is a player that scouts will watch. They want to make sure that he can actually play, that he gets back to form, and then after the season, he's going to endure countless questions, interviews, and background checks to see what his role in that was. But we've seen players in recent memory. Prince Shembo comes to mind. He was at the heart of a rape investigation at Notre Dame, and he still ended up being a fourth-round pick. That ends up backfiring on Atlanta as he then was charged with some animal cruelty, which recently got pled down, but he has since been released. So teams continue to take risks on these guys. Even in the middle rounds, they continue to get bit in the ass too.
Anybody else for Oklahoma you want to talk about?
That covers it.
Good. They're going to be interesting next year, though. Not to get ahead, but I think they'll be interesting next year. Oklahoma State, dude. I didn't even realize this, but I just quick Google search. Oklahoma State only had one player drafted last year. Did you know that? I didn't even realize that until just literally right now. So,
they're kind of going through a down period, and they've had, one of their quarterbacks has transferred out. One of their most dynamic offensive players, Tyreek Hill, has ran into some legal trouble, and he ends up getting kicked out and ends up transferring to Akron. So it's a program in flux. We all like Mike Gundy. If they're good this year, he's going to be kind of a magician to pull that one off.
And that kind of leads us in. So I text Justice because I wanted to get his opinion on this since he's not here. Rest in peace, Justice. But Emmanuel Ogba. So, I think this is going to be this year's fight, right, for pass rusher. And Justice says not a force player. So I'm just going to get that out there now. Says not a force player. So what are your thoughts on Ogba?
Well, he's an underclassman. So my first thing that I always say about underclassmen is we don't have to make a definitive statement about them the summer before their junior year. But I see why Justice would say that, because he doesn't strike you as that explosive type of edge player. It's more like one of these big kind of deliberate. I say deliberate. I kind of mean disciplined. He follows his assignments. He makes plays at and behind the line of scrimmage, but he's not exploding to the ball. He's not going to be, when you look at Oakman, we talked about Oakman. He is a guy with explosive potential, and Agba doesn't seem like that guy. But that being said, he's still a really productive player who had 11 sacks last year. He was first team all Big 12. He was there. I believe he was the Big 12 defensive lineman of the year as a sophomore. So there is something there. And we've seen that even when a guy isn't a force player, that doesn't mean the NFL teams aren't going to like that player for the discipline, the work, and the size. So I still would expect, if Agba declares that he's a day two guy, that's barring, a setback from productivity standpoint. But I see why, you can't just look at the 11 sacks and be like, oh, this guy, this year he's going to have 15 or 16. And even if he does, is it like a Nate Orchard 15 or 16, or is it like, Vic Beasley junior year type of production. It's going to be more like Orchard, and I think he kind of is like Shalik Calhoun, that type of player, except bigger.
He's a big dude, 6'4", 270 already,
Mm-hmm.
like big dude. So when you look at, let's see here, when you look at Oklahoma State, do they? I mean, they have a couple guys with names that I'm familiar with, but outside of Agba, I'm like, and their kicker, I'm kind of scratching my head. Like, do you have anybody else?
Yeah, they got a cornerback named Kevin Peterson, and I know some of draft Twitter's already in on Kevin Peterson. They've been talking about him. He's a taller guy. He can cover. Interesting though, just came out maybe a day or two ago that Peterson he just had arthroscopic knee surgery, and they said he's going to miss a couple weeks. I'm always impressed when a guy can actually get back from an arthroscopic knee surgery within a couple weeks. Peterson, he's close. He's listed at 5'11". I think he's a legit 5'11" from looking at the tape. I mean, they don't seem to be exaggerating there. He's 190, so you look, that's pretty good size for a corner. And if the knee injury is minor and he does get back on the field quickly, he's going to be a player to watch for them. Now, I'm always skeptical, even with the arthroscopic stuff, because that's cartilage. And when you're talking about a corner, you are talking about a player that you want to have some explosion, some change of direction. And the change of direction part can really suffer when a player has that arthroscopic procedure. This is not like a Brandon Sheriff who is playing offensive line and who has the scope on Monday and plays on Saturday. This is a corner who's got to flip his hips and plant and cut. And they've got to be careful with him. They don't want to rush him back. If it takes more than 2 weeks, I think they should ease him in. I mean, what's the rush? This guy's a senior. He's practiced. He knows the system. They haven't undergone a coaching change. Let this kid get healthy. They probably have a couple cupcakes early in the season too, if they need to rest them.
Going over the rest of their roster right now, they have a wide receiver that's 5'7". Did you know that? That's crazy. I'm always interested in stuff like that. Anything else
The
from
Browns
Oklahoma?
will draft that guy.
Yeah, and they'll make him. And then everybody, no, they won't draft him.
They'll sign
him
him
undrafted free agent.
Right. And then he'll make the team.
Yeah, and he'll explode.
Right.
You got anything else from Oklahoma State?
No, I think we're ready to go on to the next team.
All right, Texas. Man, this is so weird. I mean, I know Malcolm Brown was picked in the first round, but it's so weird to see Texas like not really that good at football, right? Isn't that weird?
Yeah, I mean, what were they, a 6-win team last year? And you just don't really know where I'm looking at it wasn't hard for me to find 3 guys to talk about tonight, but it would have been hard for me to find 4. And in the past, it wouldn't be hard to find like 8 guys from Texas. So it is kind of weird. It is weird to see Malcolm Brown go early and then no one else go until like the 5th and 6th rounds for them. And that's kind of what you're looking at this year, I think. So I'll start it off with the player that I really like, and he stuck out when I was watching. Who was their defensive end last year? Cedric. Names escape me, but I'm watching him. He's number 88, and number 98 keeps drawing my eye, and that's Hassan Ridgeway, a junior defensive tackle this year. And Ridgeway just really, really I thought he was really impressive player in the couple of Texas games that I saw last year. So he was a guy that I wasn't even trying to watch, and I had to look him up and say, like, who's 98? This kid can play. He was making a lot of plays behind the line of scrimmage. I think he ended the season with 6 sacks, which doesn't sound like a ton, but when you're talking interior pressure, he looked like a really athletic guy, and he's listed at 320 pounds. If he's 320 and moves and tests the way he looks like he moves, I think you're talking about another potential first-round defensive lineman.
Yeah, Ridgeway was one of the guys that I actually had written down. The other guy I have written down is only because I think he was like a 5-star recruit, but I know he was at least a 4-star recruit. And I remember when he started there, um, I remember people were like, Jonathan Gray is going to be like the next first round running back taken. Like there was
Mm-hmm.
legit talk about Jonathan Gray being an early round guy, and now people are like, "Who's Jonathan Gray?" So the guy for me to watch this year is Jonathan Gray because there was clearly talent there. Like you don't get rated by all these recruiting sites as one of the top 10 recruits in the state of or in the country, and then just not having any talent. But um, I think the change in coach or the coaching change and the change in scheme has really slowed down any momentum he had. And I think this year's big because running backs are always draftable. Like somebody will take a flyer on him in the 6th or 7th round, but we're talking about a guy that probably could have been a round 2 or 3 guy. And now he's going to battle to get into that end of the 3rd round, beginning of the 4th round with a good season. So that's going to be interesting to watch.
Gray is the guy I had down too because, like you said, he was a 5-star recruit rated by Rivals, and he came in and he played a lot as a freshman, and had I think
And
around
he played
seven.
well. I mean,
Yeah,
it
yeah,
wasn't like he just played; he played well.
yeah. I think he had around 700 or so yards. Now the problem is the last 2 years he still hung out at that like 700-yard range, and then the yards per carry has actually gone down every year. And last year as a junior, 4.3 yards a carry. That was as the lowest of his college career. And we saw the same thing happen with the running back Malcolm Brown last year. As a senior, I think he averaged like 3.9 or something like that a carry. Then he goes and he tests really, really well. And he got some backing on Twitter from some draft analysts. I think Matt Waldman was the guy who was high on Malcolm Brown. Jonathan Gray almost has taken the exact same college career trajectory as Malcolm Brown. 5-star recruit, similar size, hasn't lived up to the billing, but yet he still might test pretty well and get an opportunity that way. But what are we talking about there? 6th round or later? Teams don't NFL teams, whether we like it or not, they look at statistics. They look at production. And with running backs, we're talking not about just total yards, but also yards per carry. And that yards per carry, in my opinion, at the FBS level, and I've talked about this before, it should be 6 yards or more for like a top prospect, 5.5 yards or more for a mid-round prospect. Um, Jonathan Gray isn't there. He's far below that. So you're going to project that he's going to break more tackles or make more guys miss at the pro level, and that's just not realistic.
Anybody else on this depressing Texas team? I'm getting depressed all of a sudden.
Big 12, man. I wrote down cornerback Duke Thomas. I don't really have any notes on him, but I know he was a member of that secondary, and they actually have played pretty well in the secondary over the last couple of years. So they've lost some players in the last couple of drafts, and Quandre Diggs was notably drafted this year. Duke Thomas is a player I think can pick up some of the slack and have a productive year. And I think he had something like 11 pass breakups last year. So he's no slouch back there. A little bit on the small side, but, as long as he can run, and Texas does recruit guys that can run. They tend to test pretty well in the speed department. So I think this guy can play a little bit.
TCU, best team in Texas now? That's weird to say.
Yeah.
Maybe Baylor is better, but I mean, it's going to be close. It's going to be Baylor and TCU again. Um, I'll start with the one to watch. I'm not going to say he's the one to know, but I'm going to say the one to watch. And that's because he's 6'1". He gets away with a lot of bad habits, and he's a quarterback, so he's going to go through the entire ringer of processes and thoughts and ideals. And that's Trayvon Boykin. Jeez, I butchered that name. Trayvon Boykin. 41 total touchdowns last year, 4,600 total yards. I mean, dude put up numbers, like video game numbers. And I think I mean, like everybody asks, is he really any good? Like that's still a question. Like, is he good? I don't know. What are your thoughts on Boykin?
Yeah, that's a good question. I don't know. I don't think he's first round good. I don't think he's second round good. So then that gets into a philosophy thing. And we have talked about it on the show, and we've talked about it on Twitter. And that is about quarterback development and how much of that actually takes place beyond the college level. Now, I'm not necessarily a believer in the new mantra, which is that players never change, but only in respect that I do think players can get better and they can break bad habits, but it takes so much work, so much repetition. And for a quarterback to get that kind of work, he has to be a highly drafted prospect. We're talking round 1, 2, or 3. Round 4, I mean, just as an example, a player who was highly touted, a round 4 quarterback a couple of years ago, Ryan Nassib, he has not been given that type of development as a 4th-round player, and he's an afterthought now. Now, if Trayvon Boykin goes into the 4th, 5th round, and he doesn't fall into a situation where he can be behind a very established starter and sit for several years, and that team's comfortable holding a roster spot for him, then I don't know that you're going to see the type of development that you want to see. And Boykin had some seriously erratic games. The West Virginia game comes to mind. And the reason I point that one out is because when we're talking about quarterbacks, especially small quarterbacks who might have a hand size issue, that game was played in bad weather, and Boykin was 12 for 31 or somewhere around there passing the football that day. Yeah, he's a super athletic guy. They even played him at receiver. So is he going to have a good enough season where teams consider him a legitimate prospect? Is he going to take kind of like a long, winding Tyrod Taylor route to where he gets an opportunity to start several years down the road? Or is he a player who they might talk position switch right off the bat? He's an interesting guy, and I love prospects like this because they're fun to talk about. I don't love them as high prospects, as high round picks.
So is he Brett Hundley this year?
Except without the height and without the
size.
Without the size, and that is something that the NFL teams desire. But then you bring up Hundley, he goes in the 5th round. Boykin, just projecting right now, you're probably looking at a 5th round pick or later.
Who do you got? Sorry, I'll let you go next.
After Boykin, I have their running back, Aaron Green, and he's picked up some Twitter steam lately. I know Josh Norris was tweeting out some vines about Aaron Green. And it's interesting because they had a running back, B.J. Catalon, who declared for the draft last year as a junior, and Green's probably the better prospect. He's a better player. He's got better size. He should test pretty well, and he looks like a versatile player who can run and catch the ball out of the backfield. So Green is a player who you don't know with running backs because I think their stock can fluctuate a lot because some teams do view them as kind of a commodity. But what you're going to want to watch for in Green is, can he keep up the high yards per carry? Can he keep up the receiving total? And then teams will make sure that you can pass block at the end of the year because you're not going to see a lot of that on the TCU tape.
What do you mean? They don't ask their running backs to pass block? No, I'm just kidding. You want to talk at all about Josh Doxson, or are we going to let him be for now?
No, I had Doxson written down because 6'4", skinny guy, but he's listed under 200 pounds, but he's right around there. Tall, skinny guy. I think he's on the older side for a prospect, but I haven't really come across what is his clear age. I've heard people say he's going to be a 25-year-old rookie, 24-year-old rookie, somewhere in there though, because I think he was a transfer, right? So those transfer guys tend to be on the older side coming out because they had to sit out a lot, unless they're graduate transfers, they had to sit out that year. So Doxson, very, very productive guy last year, over 1,000 yards. And there's some really great videotape of him on Draft Breakdown, high pointing the ball and doing all those great red zone things that we like to see from tall receivers. So he's a popular player on draft Twitter right now. So it'll be interesting to see how that holds up throughout the season. But he's a little skinny for a tall guy, for my liking.
Damn it, I went backwards again. One to watch for me. I'm going to butcher this, so I'm just going to go with it. Halapolavati Vatai. That's right.
Yeah, that's perfect.
Vatai, 6'6", 310. Talented player. Are they going to kick him over to left tackle this year, you think? I haven't seen anything, but I honestly didn't look that hard either.
Yeah, I haven't seen anything, but I know they had Fabaluje last year go to the pros.
That guy was massive too,
and he wasn't good.
No,
he was just a big body. So I don't know about this guy, but he's kind of he's small compared to the last.
Yeah, right. 315, tiny guy. So, yeah. So I'll be interested to watch him because again, in those spread offenses, I think you learn about lateral quickness in guys a lot, but I don't think you learn about ability to kind of set in deep pass sets and stuff like that. So he'll be interesting to watch, and he's a guy like a sleeper for me this year.
There was one more guy I had down from TCU because to compensate for for the Kansas having only one name, we were down 4 for TCU. So I have defensive end Terrell Lathan, who is he's 6'5", 280, 290 pound guy. So he's a player that they're going to look at as like a 5 technique, or a player who can maybe get kicked inside on passing downs. But he was a fairly productive fairly productive getting to the quarterback, 6 sacks last year. So that's a player that has the NFL body. So it'd be interesting if and they had a good defense last year. It turns out they're all really slow, but
yeah, they are.
So it would be interesting if how Lathan tests out. If he's anything like his counterparts who went pro last year, Paul Dawson, Chris Hackett, and Kevin White, he's probably going to be slow.
Yeah, he's going to run a 4.9.
I don't know. They need to learn something from Baylor's strength and conditioning coach, because Baylor puts out the freaks and Texas Christian puts out the guys who can play football but can't run.
Texas Tech. Oh, man. When are they going to be a fun team to watch again? I'm so bored by the Big 12. Like, they're just it's a boring conference. I do have one name, though, and that's just because I watch a lot of edge players. Pete Robertson. He's like I don't even know what position he plays, to be honest. I think they call it a bandit. And look, yeah. But he had 12 sacks last year. 6'3", they list him at 240. Going to be interesting just to watch him play this year because, again, Texas Tech's defense is garbage. But, I want to see guys that can get after the quarterback, and he's going to have, like, every opportunity to do that playing for Texas Tech. So I'm going to be interested to watch him this year.
The guy I have down for Texas Tech is offensive tackle LaRaven Clark. I mean, for one, you've got the name LaRaven. So he's on the all-name team automatically. But this kid was actually a pretty legitimate prospect going back 2 years to his redshirt sophomore year. People were talking about him back then. Now I think he's actually their best draft-eligible prospect. He's a redshirt senior now, and he's got good size. He's got pretty good athleticism. It's tricky to grade offensive linemen in that system, but he seems to be a player that I think NFL teams are going to be high on and are going to hope for big things out of him. With offensive linemen, they can have that disastrous season that can set them out. But Clark's a player I think I expect to have a good year.
And he's gonna move. He's gonna move him back to guard once he gets to the NFL. So, like, you're talking about a guy that was an All-American, freshman All-American, but an All-American guard that moved out to left tackle, and just, I mean, he's not a left tackle, and so I don't know. That's all
But
I have.
he can play left tackle in that system because they're getting the ball out so quick.
Well, yeah. You're right. But like, I just don't see a left tackle in the NFL. Yeah. But I think, and maybe that hurts him, like in his draft stock, right? Because he's had to play left tackle, and he hasn't been as good as he was as a freshman. And that's where we kind of get off on this whole like, oh well, you know, you can't go back to old tape or bull crap like that, like we do with Hackenberg and stuff. Like, if you go back and look at this guy and you're going to rank him as a guard, and you go back and look at how good of a guard prospect he was as a true freshman, you have to, like, I just don't understand why that's a problem. Like, I don't understand why people get in, you know, their panties in a bunch about stuff like this, and they have to, you know, well, we can't go back that far. A player is what he is. Well, what was he when he played guard? He was good. So I don't know. Sorry.
Yeah, and you look at a player like Brandon Sheriff last year, who, you know, and now he's moving to guard for the Redskins, and you know, he played tackle at least for the last 3 years of his career. So you have to do some bit of projection. So it is different. I think it's different for offensive line, especially when you're projecting tackle to guard than it is for maybe a quarterback. But there are factors. I am pretty big on the, you know, what have you done for me lately and using the most recent tape. But I do have exceptions to that rule. It's not a hard and fast rule. So Clark would be an exception. If he's, you know, if I'm watching him and I get that guard feel, I'm going to go back and look and see how he did, because I want to see, you know, but sometimes we're just making that projection on a guess. Lael Collins, I guess he did have some early guard tape, but he was a player that played left tackle the last 2 years, and I was always picturing him as a guard, for example.
Anybody else for Texas Tech?
I just wanted to mention their quarterback, Pat Mahomes, and the only reason I wanted to mention him is because his father was a relief pitcher and I believe spot starter for the Minnesota Twins when I was growing up. So Pat Mahomes, but I don't even know if he's draft eligible. I know he's a sophomore, but I think he's a redshirt sophomore. He's going to get a full season to start for them. And you know the Texas Tech quarterbacks are always putting up numbers.
And we come to West Virginia, and if you listened to the podcast last year, you would have known about Kevin White early, because my friend here, Justin Higdon, talked about Kevin White, and when everybody told us that he was trash and Justin was overrating him, Justin stuck to his guns. Now, being picked 7th overall doesn't mean Justin was right, but suck it. So heading into
with Kevin White, all of the first-round receivers are hurt. So I still have the utmost faith in Kevin White.
That's right. So going to West Virginia this year, they're just, like I said, the Big 12 is a disaster. I don't know. What I'll let you start. What do you got?
I've got two safeties, so I'll just knock them out. Carl Joseph is a player that Draft Twitter seems to love, and I'm not crazy about him because he's like a small in the box safety. He's a
sub 200 pounds,
right? And he's 5'10". He's 5'10", like 190, 195, and he plays in the box and he's attacking. You know, I talked about it earlier, but how you like those safe, how NFL likes those safeties that can come up and attack the box. But they also, when they're as small as Carl Joseph, they need to play the ball. And he had 3 pass breakups the entire year last year, and I think 1 interception. And he's got a guy next to him in that defensive backfield, KJ Dillon, who actually made more plays on the ball last year, and who also showed that he can play up in the box and make those tackles on those quick hitting plays. So I'm not going to say today that here in the summertime that KJ Dillon is a better prospect than Carl Joseph. But what I will say is that Carl Joseph, to me, he doesn't stand out as being a first round potential draft pick based on his resume to date. And I don't think there's a lot of separation between he and KJ Dillon. I think there are things to be said about both. I think they're both draftable guys, and they're both gonna. I think they're both gonna run well. But to me, Joseph needs to show that he can play the ball better and make more disruptive plays. He needs to break up more passes. He needs to get his hands on the ball more often. I can't depend on a guy like that to just basically be another linebacker.
So the one guy I had written down was the running back, just because he's interesting to me, and even though they don't run the ball very much, Russell Shell or Russell, sorry, Russell Shell, yeah, Rushel, Russell. Um, he's a smaller guy, like 5'10", but they list him at like 217. So guys like that are always interesting to me because they're kind of those small, low to the ground, powerful runners, and that's not really what you expect when you think of West Virginia. You think of the other guy they have, Wendell Smallwood, who's like 5'10" and like 195. So when you're talking about Shell, you're talking about a smaller guy who runs with power, and I'm always interested in running backs because I think you always need to draft one late or early, depending on who you are. Hey, David Johnson hasn't played at all this year, but
yeah, it's Duke Johnson. So
yeah, yeah, everybody's injured. So, but I'm just gonna Shell's kind of my sleeper on this team because this team isn't like super talented.
Yeah, Smallwood. You mentioned Smallwood, and he's more like the scat back type. And
Yeah.
I think Shell, like toward the end of the season, he started to cede some carries to Smallwood. But Shell is that power back. He's a transfer from Pitt too, so he's a fourth-year junior coming in this year. He gives them, there were games last year when they really struggled to pass the ball, which in that air raid system is a huge problem. But Shell was able to kind of get them through with his power running. It's not a sustainable thing in that offense because they're going to eventually have to pass their way out of things. But I think Shell, he's kind of out of place on a West Virginia team. If I was a running back, I can't imagine why I would transfer to West Virginia. But we've seen it a couple times lately with the kid Charles Sims a couple years ago and with Shell. So they keep getting these running back transfers. But I don't know. The sleeper I had was another defensive back, Terrell Chestnut. He's a corner for them. He can run, and I saw him make a couple plays on the ball in one game, and so I expected when I looked up his stats to see more, and they weren't there. So it was like I saw the one game where he showed that he can make plays on the ball. But Terrell Chestnut is a guy. He has he appears to have good speed on tape. He did make a play where he scooped up a fumble, returned that for a touchdown in one of the games that I watched. And he's listed at, give me a second here, but he's listed at 5'11", 190. So if he comes in at an actual 5'11", 190, we're talking about a good-sized corner. So Chestnut's a player that I think if he can harness that one game worth of playmaking, then we might hear his name a little bit more later down the road.
So what we've learned today, kids, is the Big 12 is not chock full of draft prospects heading into the season, but every year, we're surprised and guys show up, and so we're looking forward to the Big 12 this year. I really am looking forward to watching Baylor and TCU week in and week out. And I would like to see Texas start to come back a little bit. Oklahoma's going to be the same as long as Bob Stoops is there. So they'll be good, Big 12 good every couple of years, and then get into a BC. Or there's no BCS anymore, is there?
No.
They'll get into a playoff game and then get smacked around a little bit. So
I don't think they're getting into a playoff game this year because with this, even with the TCUs and the Baylors here, I think we've kind of illustrated that this conference just isn't they don't have the competition level week to week. It's going to be tough for one of these teams to have a resume that's playoff worthy without some of the other teams from the Pac-12, Big 10, and SEC stumbling. They're going to need help from the other conferences. None of these teams, in my opinion, are going to be able to get into that playoff game on their own accord. You're muted, Seth.
Damn it. I think the Pac-12 and ACC can cannibalize itself, right? And like take themselves out of the playoffs. So I think you could end up with a big two SEC teams and then like a Big 12 team. Like I could definitely see that happening. Like you could end up with Bama, whoever else is good in the SEC, and then Ohio State and like TCU or Baylor this year, and like the ACC and Pac-12 are shut out. It's not because I don't have faith in like ASU or Oregon or USC, but I don't have faith in any of them. So, so all right. Well, next week ACC. Justice has already texted me, Daddy. Apparently, that's the name of a player. No,
Daddy Nicholas.
Yes, Daddy Nicholas from Virginia, right?
He is from Virginia Tech, and
Virginia Tech. I was so close.
He will get
close
to face Ohio State week 1, and he had a really nice game against them last year in their only loss. So, and we've also with the ACC coming up, we get to talk about some people's quarterback 1, 2, or 3 coming into the season, and that's Jacoby Brissett. So. Yep. I am not a believer, but some people are, and we'll talk more about that next week.
Yeah, we'll have Charles McDonald on so he can serve up the hype.
He can sell us because he needs selling.
Yeah. So we'll have fun next week talking ACC. We might be able to talk about Florida State if they can fill the team. Depends on how many people get paroled before that week. So we'll talk about it though. So thanks for listening, everybody. Again, check us out on iTunes. Cody Kessler's on my TV right now, so I just want to remind everybody that he's not going to be very good. And and as we head out of here, thanks for listening, and everybody have a good night.
Good night.